Former Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton has been charged for illegally storing and transmitting classified information. Bolton served in President Trump's first term, but their relationship soured after he left the administration. In 2020, Bolton wrote a book critical of President Trump's foreign policy approach, and that landed him on the opposite side of his former boss. And after President Trump returned to the White House in January, he took away Bolton's security detail. But keep in mind, Iran had targeted Bolton for death. John Bolton's lawyer, in a written statement, said the facts of the case were investigated and resolved years ago. Criminal defense attorney and former Manhattan prosecutor Jeremy Saland joining us now to talk about this indictment. 26 pages. This indictment of John Bolton we got yesterday, 18 different counts. What is your assessment on the strength of the government's case here?
I'd sort of start with two places, meaning two things can be true as well. Number one, this can be part of the retribution revenge tour of Donald Trump, a la James Comey and Tish James and maybe others. But at the same time, it can have legs and be substantive and actually be backed by what appears to be legitimate evidence. And you look at that indictment, and that indictment is, I believe, 26 pages long, more of a speaking indictment, kind of like we saw from Jack Smith against Donald Trump, laying out how do we establish the intent? What are the substantive acts that he's alleged to have done? How do we know this is true and reaches that reasonable cause to believe that a felony, in these case, these 18 counts, were committed, as opposed to let's drop in a new prosecutor who has no experience, rush something through at the last minute. This has been an ongoing investigation. So two things can be true. Could be retribution, but potentially, on its face, can have real substance.
When I was reading through the indictment yesterday after it came out, I noted that the indictment includes some public statements, some quotes from media interviews that John Bolton had done talking about the importance of protecting classified information. So how might his defense team square those statements with the allegations in this indictment?
Yeah, there's some difficult issues here. It's not as if they can just shoot out that selective and vindictive prosecution, which doesn't always succeed regardless, but the other folks have. Here, to your point, there is his own words to say. I wouldn't use, for example, a Telegram or Signal. I wouldn't use those apps. And there's long paragraphs in that indictment of words of acknowledgement about the importance of this confidential information that could potentially be of national security and damage the nation. So he has multiple examples of recognizing the value of that of the information and how you can't share it. And then there's also messages to these two other individuals, which are family members, I believe his wife and daughter, if I'm correct, but two other unnamed individuals, where he's explaining that he's sending it through these encrypted chats, and he's writing out all these diaries and providing this information. So you're going to attack it and challenge it on, in part, as that letter said from his attorney, that this has already been addressed and resolved, and he had permission, and there's already a book published, and this was something that he knew was going on. I should say, the government knew was going on. That's why we have this book. So this is not secret information. This was not something that is nefarious as the government is making out. But again, I'll go back to, on its face, it's much more concerning, and there are legs being prosecuted by multiple prosecutors with experience in this exact type of law.
And also that affidavit, the search warrant that needed to be granted by a judge for his house, that search happening back in August. But when we're talking about mishandling classified documents, I've got to ask about how this case compares to the charges against President Trump and those documents that were found at Mar-a-Lago. How are these cases either similar or different?
Yeah, I think to some extent it's kind of rich that you're hearing from Bondi and Patel about the weaponization of justice, and everyone should be treated equally. When we had this Jack Smith, excuse the term Jack Smith indictment for Espionage Act for the retention of these similar documents that the president allegedly refused to return after he was noticed and told to return these documents. I do not believe, to make my recollection is correct, he was charged with the transmission of those documents and those materials and that information, like Bolton is to family members, but the retention is similar on its face. Both the same crime. Ultimately, the president won the election, so that was, gotten rid of. It disappeared in terms of that indictment, and it was never proven beyond a reasonable doubt. but the retention part is similar. And I think that that's why it's serious too. And both were an ongoing investigation as opposed to a snap judgment attack on anybody. So on that front, there are some similarities, and the exposure is real. Keep in mind, these counts can carry up to 10 years incarceration, whether or not that would actually happen. It's very serious on its face. And one last point before I leave, you mentioned a judge signing off on search warrants. That is similar too, that a judge said there is reasonable cause or probable cause to believe the evidence of the criminality is at these locations, just like Trump and just like Bolton.
Well, I also want to ask something about the messaging portion of this indictment, that he was sending these diary-like notes. He was sending these documents to those two family members via some kind of messaging app. We've seen members of President Trump's current administration sending information via messaging apps, not via official government channels. Is there any comparison there, or how might that play into a potential defense that John Bolton might put up?
Well, generally speaking, you can't say because someone else did it, I can do it too if it breaks the law. It may go into that selective prosecution and vindictive prosecution argument, but you're correct, and that's a great point to make with the Signal app, if I recall correctly, where there was a journalist added to a conversation with national defense material and information that was being disclosed improperly. So it goes back to what I said initially, and I think that two things can be true. This can be retribution. This can be basically the president saying, these people who worked for me or disliked me and are now speaking out against me, I'm going to silence them. I'm going to punish them. That can be true, but it also can be true that if you're not handling these documents correctly, and you have that intent, very specific intent, you knowingly and intentionally are sharing them or possessing them, and they fall within the category of this Espionage Act violation, then you are susceptible. But unequivocally, it's going to be raised, and I would not be shocked if it's raised sooner rather than later, that this is the same mistake that the president allegedly committed and the same actions that his own people currently, without punishment, committed who are serving underneath him.
Criminal defense attorney and former New York prosecutor Jeremy Saland, thanks so much for sharing some of your expertise with us this morning.
My pleasure.